Okay, so here we go, decoupling with time. This concept is basic to understanding the difference between old traditional dentistry and modern dentistry, or what we call the post-amalgam era. Amalgam had some benefits, but had some drawbacks. But the drawbacks of leaky margins around amalgam are actually exacerbated. They're worst with composite. In other words, a bad composite is better than a bad amalgam. What kind of...
Opposite. A bad amalgam is better than a bad composite.
That's right. A bad amalgam is better than a bad composite, but you are, every one of you are being approached by manufacturers who say, we have an easier way to do composites. And they offer you universal adhesives and bulk fill materials, and we're supposed to save you what, 5 minutes? Well, we're going to teach you that in 5 minutes, if you use these materials differently, then you can double, triple, or even make a restoration that can be permanent compared to amalgam restorations that are always at risk of fracture. Now, when we look at this real-time video, this shows us how composites interacting with an adhesive in a cavity. There's no enamel on this cavity. It's just a 2mm by 4mm wide cavity. So the C factor is medium high. But once you put the light on this composite, the bond system under the composite had not had enough time to mature. So the shrinkage of the composite is going to pull, stretch, and eventually debond in the first minute this restoration. And that gap that you're seeing right there, see if we can see that. Is that showing up, Davey? That gap is what causes sensitivity and eventual redecay and initiation of cracks. So that's a failure in the future that's guaranteed by the technique of bulk fill with a adhesive that is not a gold standard adhesive.
And so when we talk about adhesive dentistry, it can be summed up as a competition between the developing bonds and the resulting stress of the materials that we use. And so our goal is to maintain the bond, and the only way to do that is to minimize the stresses. So when we teach a doctor biomimetic dentistry, we don't just talk about what's your bond potential or use this material. What we really want to say is the techniques that you employ really have a direct correlation with the longevity of each restoration that you place. And so in the 6 lessons that we teach, 3 of the lessons focus on maximizing the bond strength, the first part of the equation. But the other half is equally important, and that is to minimize stress to the developing hybrid layer.
And so adhesive dentistry could be expressed as a simple relationship between bonds and stresses. If the bonds can withstand the stress, the restorative technique will be successful. And these teeth were both restored with composites, but the teeth on the right had early stresses, early failures, and early loss of integrity, and obviously they're not going to last very long. And so the 6 lessons approach, we have a podcast now that can introduce you to many of these concepts and introduce you to the history of how they were developed at the Alleman Center. We encourage you all to watch those podcasts. If you have a bulk of composite and you polymerize it, the shrinkage that will move away from the less mineralized areas deep in the dentin towards the higher mineralization, towards enamel and superficial dentin, will cause the gap to form. It will stretch first, it will be weakened first, and then under function, it will separate. And this is the failure mode of composites that are not stress reduced. So this paper is the classic paper on C factor, but again, it's done with chemical cure materials, so it needs to be understood that light cure materials actually exacerbate the stress that comes in this ratio of bonded to unbonded surfaces. The ratio of bonded to unbonded surfaces means that you have less flow if you have a C factor of 5 versus a C factor of 1, because the direction is going to be moving towards the bulk of composite. So these early strategies, they failed to solve the hierarchy of bondability problem. And of course, I introduced the hierarchy of bondability, so it's hard to understand something you haven't been taught or discovered. But a biomimetic restoration in a biomimetic approach always has a direct component. So the difference between a direct restoration and indirect restoration in most dentists' minds is indirect is better than direct, and that's just not true. Everything in a biomimetic restoration has a direct component. No matter what your top is made out of or who makes it, the bottom part that you are responsible for is the most important part of the biomimetic restoration, and that's the bottom of the restoration. And so these modern solutions that we have include immediate dentin sealing, resin coating, deep margin elevation and bio-base formation, and fiber placement and stress-reduced direct composite. So these are the 5 breakthroughs that once they were published in the 90s and in the early 2000s, all of a sudden we had the ability to understand, if you understand flow and you understand a hierarchy of bondability, to predict which restorations are going to be twice as durable or 3 times or 4 times. But this paper that Davey and I with 4 other dentists published in 2001, which is called Decoupling with Time, Overcoming the Hierarchy of Bondability 2021. That's 5 years ago, isn't it, Davey? Dang. In that paper, this lecture is based on the concepts that are published in that paper. And that paper is available online, no charge. I think we have about 60 references that also give the scientific foundation. But if you're not familiar with each of these modern solutions, then you need more training. So decoupling with time is the solution to this problem of the hierarchy of bondability and the flow of the composite moving in the wrong direction. Decoupling with time guarantees that the initial critical layer of that 1.5 millimeters of composite moves in the direction that does not disrupt the hybrid layer.
Now, when we talk about a very basic tenet of biomimetic dentistry is this idea of sealing the dentin before you take an impression for an indirect restoration. This was first introduced in 1994 out of Japan, and then talked about further in Europe in 98, 99, but it
96,
wasn't 96, but it wasn't until 2005 where Pascal Alleman showed that doing immediate dentin sealing improved the bond strength and had a high correlation with the bondability of the indirect restoration, to the tune of increasing the bond to dentin 400%. Now, what is actually happening when you do immediate dentin sealing? You place an adhesive and you let that mature for a period of time, anywhere between 30 minutes to 2 weeks. And so when my dad and myself and a few others were working on this paper about decoupling with time, we said immediate dentin sealing really should be called decoupling with time. Because when you're doing a direct restoration, you are doing immediate dentin sealing, but in order to achieve a bond strength that mimics the tensile strength of the DEJ of 40 to 50 megapascals, you have to allow that slow maturing bond enough time to develop. There was a paper that was just published last month out of Iraq that actually showed this with the adhesive G2 bond from GC, where they tested bond strengths with G premio bond and G2 bond and tested bonds at immediate and then after 5 minutes, and guess what happened? If you waited 5 minutes after you placed your adhesive before you started to do a direct restoration, you improved your bond strength about 40%.
Yep.